So we're going to go ahead and get started. And Earl and I are going to be presenting tonight on COVID in Color. This is a poignant and difficult conversation, especially with everything that's going on now. But it's a conversation that's long overdue. This is an introduction, so we will have subsequent meetings because we can't cover everything in 1 hour, of course. And then there's so much to talk about and discuss. And also, we want you to feel comfortable in taking some action. So we'll go ahead and get started. So our organization is WeBoo, and guess what that stands for? W. Wanda E. Earl, Boo Inc. Until every community thrives. And we offer community and faith-based modules, equity and empowerment, information and training on adverse childhood experiences, anchoring resilient communities, environmental strategies, and more. So what we already know and what we've already heard, and if you could mute your phones, that would be great, just for now. What we've heard is that African Americans are more impacted and more at risk for the coronavirus. And what is the coronavirus? Well, there have been coronaviruses in the past. This is called a novel coronavirus because it's a new coronavirus. These viruses differ from the flu. However, it is a strain. So when we're talking about the novel coronavirus, this is a virus that attaches itself to the nasal passages, to the lungs, and that's why people have to get on respirators so often. It is really a horrible disease, as we all have experienced now that we're at 101,000 dead in the United States. And it's a tragedy. Of course, it's a tragedy, and we could talk about all the things surrounding that, but really just wanted to give you that overall picture because there's so much more to discuss.
As you can see, there are many symptoms, and we want to look first at cough, and that's a dry kind of hacking cough. Another symptom is fever, as well as chills, muscle pain, shortness of breath or difficulty breathing, sore throat, and then a new loss of taste or smell. Now, these symptoms are often shared by other diseases, so the only really way to know for sure is to have a test, get a test, and if that test is positive, then you are infected with the COVID-19. Now, keep in mind, you may have one or more of these, or you may not have any symptoms. So we have to be careful of that as well. I have a niece who tested positive, and her only symptom was she lost her senses of taste and smell. Now, her husband subsequently had a test, and I don't think he got his results back yet. But even if you don't have any symptoms, you can still cause other people to become infected by the virus. Now, of course, there are things you can do to kind of protect yourself. First and foremost is washing of your hands regularly for at least 20 seconds. Secondly, using disinfectant sprays on surfaces. Thirdly, stay home. Now, for those of you who are homebodies, you have an advantage because you're comfortable at home all the time. But for those of you who like to go out places and the very social people would have more difficulty following the stay-at-home warnings. And then when you blow your nose or cough, we have to be very careful. And to cough or sneeze, for that matter as well, into a cloth, discard that cloth, and wash your hands. And here's something that everyone can do. and I had intended to bring my mask with me today, but you can wear a face covering. When you wear a face covering, that helps to protect you, as well as if you have the virus unknowingly, that helps protect others who you come into contact with. So in addition to protecting yourself, we want to protect those around us. So you cannot be too careful.
One of the things that many people experience during this time is cabin fever, and cabin fever is real. The symptoms of cabin fever can range from irritability to depression to just malaise, not wanting to do anything. But then, especially when it pertains to young people, one of the things we need to watch out for, not only for ourselves, but for them, has to do with grief. And they have literally lost things. They've lost time at school, graduations, ceremonies, proms, and those kinds of things. We ourselves as adults, we may feel like we're doing okay, and then all of a sudden, you know, we fall into this one of these categories. And so it's really important to take care of our own mental health as well. So the 5 stages of grief are really something that we need to address, not only with young people, but think about it for ourselves. We have lost things, and there are people who do not have the luxury of staying at home and working from home. How many people now have lost their jobs? There's so much unemployment, so much death, until there's no way that we can approach COVID-19 and the challenges that it has presented with any kind of normalcy, because it is not normal. When I've talked to young people, and I do so on a weekly basis for 30 minutes every week just to check in with them, when they saw this slide, then they understood what they were going through. So they determined whether they were in denial. This will all wash away. It'll just wash away. And one day it'll be gone, just like a miracle. I'll leave that there. Bargaining, well, you know, maybe if I was just better enough or behaved better or, you know, prayed more, or thought more, had good thoughts, this would go away. But, you know, I promise if this goes away, I'll be good. Anger, we understand that, depression, and then comes the point of acceptance. And acceptance doesn't mean that I accept this as normal. It means that this is where I am now, and my acceptance means that I will make the adjustments that I can in order to function as well as I can until it is safe enough for me to go outside. So let's look at the data in North Carolina. So these are the percent emergency department visits across North Carolina, separated into regions. Regions 1 and 3 are decreasing in COVID-19 cases. Regions 2, 4, 5, 6, and 7 are increasing. And so, as we understand, we can't look at this as something that's across the board. Everybody is doing the same, everybody is feeling the same, everyone is going to the hospital at the same rates. That's simply not true. And so that's why it was extremely important for the city of Durham, for example. We have more stringent requirements here in Durham than there are in other parts of the state. And I personally accept that. I'm not going anywhere right now. I'm going to do exactly what the ordinances are. And so, as Earl was mentioning how important it is to take care of ourselves, we understand that the reason for that is because our counties may not be out of the woods. As a matter of fact, there are many counties in which the cases are going up. Durham and some other counties had higher rates of COVID-19 on last Saturday than they had in the past. And I think we can figure out why that is. People, I'm going out, I'm going to do what I want to do. And then now there's a problem. It's important to look at the ages that we see impacted by COVID-19, because I think you might be a little bit surprised when you look at this data, because on the left-hand side are the ages of COVID-infected individuals, and then on the right-hand side, there are the deaths. So we would think that the highest number of COVID-19 incidents or illnesses were in the age range of 65 and over, because we always hear how important it is to take care of our seniors. But the age that we see most COVID infections is actually age 25 to 49. 25 to 49. And so when you think about that, and that's the age that, people that really want to get out of the house, 18 to 24-year-olds do, but, they're kind of sequestered by the adults in the house. At least that, well, maybe not, but it's 25 to 49. And we'll see this age range as being susceptible in some other areas as well. But when you look at the deaths of individuals, then actually we're seeing the most deaths of individuals who are over 75 and older, but also 65 to 74. So that's why it's important for younger people who may be asymptomatic, without symptoms, or with symptoms, to kind of stay away from grandma, grandpa, older aunts and uncles and friends for now, because those infections could lead to death. When we look at ethnicity, and this is an important statistic, there are still more white people who are infected with COVID-19, but then there are more white people in the general population. There are less Black people, but Black people account in North Carolina for 30% of the COVID cases. And the statistics that have to do with deaths are pretty much the same in terms of Black Americans and white Americans. So, as I said, some of this conversation is not going to be real comfortable, but as I explained, we need to have serious, deep, honest conversations about what's happening to people, to Black people, so that we can understand how best to relate if we're working with Black people, if we have friends that are Black, when we ourselves as Black, what do we need to do in order to protect ourselves and our health? You're on mute.
Fact is, African Americans are more likely to die at early ages from all causes, not just the COVID. As you can see in the graph here, ages 18 to 34, we see that per 100,000 people, 142 Black die, whereas whites is 100. And then by the same token, for ages 35 through 49, we see that Black deaths are at 312, whereas white deaths are at 220. And then when we get the older ages 50 through 64, we see that 1,046 Blacks per 100,000 people die whereas for whites, the number is only 722. Now, one death is too many, but when we're talking thousands, that just doesn't make sense. Now, if our next slide here, and this is a general conditions. We're going to look at high blood pressure statistics, diabetes statistics, as well as stroke statistics. Keep in mind, the Black population in the United States is roughly 14%, roughly. And we see here that for high blood pressure, in the age group of 18 to 34, 12% of the cases are African American, whereas 10% of the cases are white. For ages 35 to 49, we see that 33% of the cases are African American, whereas 22% of the cases are white. And then when we get to ages 50 through 64, the 61% of the deaths of the high blood pressure individuals are Black, whereas 41% are white. Now, high blood pressure in particular is known as a silent killer because you can have the disease and not even know it. And this is for everyone. Now, I personally know of 2 individuals who were on blood pressure medication, stopped taking their medications, and had heart attacks and are no longer with us. And they were in their 50s. And a third person who, he was a little older, he was in his 60s, close to 70, and he stopped taking his blood pressure medication, and he had a tear in his aorta and almost perished from that. Fortunately, he survived. So high blood pressure is very serious. And then for diabetes, we see here that in the 18 to 34 age group, 1.5% of the cases are African American, while 1.4% of the cases are white. When we get to ages 35 through 49, we see that 10% of the cases are among African Americans, and 6% of the cases are for white individuals. And then in the age group of 50 to 64, 23% of the cases are African American, and only 14% are white. Now, keep in mind, we're talking about when we give the statistics for African Americans, we're talking about 14% of the population, and in this 50 to 64 age group, 14% of the population having 23% of the deaths. So this is quite a discrepancy. Now, when we look at incidence of stroke among American citizens, we see that in the 18 to 34 age group, 0.7% of stroke victims are Black, African American, and 4.4% of stroke victims are white. And then in ages 35 through 49, we see that 2% of the stroke victims are African American, and 1% is white. Now that's twice as many for Blacks as compared to whites. And then when we get to the age group of 50 to 64, we see that 7% of stroke victims are Black and 4% are white. So the thing is, COVID aside, outcomes for African Americans as far as diseases and deaths are concerned, there's a much higher percentage in the African American community.
So just for a moment, I wanted to talk about substance use and specifically opioids and alcohol in terms of COVID-19. And the reason that I'm talking about this is that whenever there have been national disasters in the past, Hurricane Katrina, for example, substance use, misuse, increased by 35%. The reason that I shared information about cabin fever and the things that are impacting our mental health is because we cannot look at COVID-19 in isolation, because there's so many things that are impacting our health and well-being, specifically as African Americans, as we're discussing tonight. Some of the reason that this is a greater issue in the African American community is because of access to alcohol. And what I mean by that has to do with alcohol outlet density. This is a term that's used when there are larger quantities of establishments that sell alcohol, convenience stores, everybody does now. I mean, Dollar Tree that sell alcohol, but most of these are in African American communities. And, you know, some people would say, well, just because it's there, it doesn't mean you have to use it. But what is the message that starts very, very early on when children are growing up in a neighborhood where every place they look, and literally almost on every corner, whatever store they want to go in to buy candy or get a soft drink, what's the first thing they see? They see alcohol. And we may say, so, you know, they don't have to, they don't have to use it. But let me ask you this question. How many of you, and you can just give me a thumbs up, how many of you like Starbucks coffee? Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. Anyway. And so there are other, two thumbs up. There are other kinds of coffee. You can even buy, a brand X and bring it home and make your own coffee. But why do people spend money on Starbucks? Because of advertising. And so there's nothing wrong with people that choose to pay, as Earl says to me, that choose to pay as much as it costs to buy a rotisserie chicken in order to get coffee. But because of advertising, the way that Starbucks is, laid out, the music, the, shh of the espresso machines and all of that, then we are lured into something that we ordinarily wouldn't be. And so what do you think a child does when they're looking around and seeing alcohol? They think it's normal, and it becomes normalized. So let's look at this. This is a busy display here, but it is for April 2020, the number of opioid overdose emergency department visits. So last month, there were, across North Carolina, there were 622 visits to the emergency department because of opioid overdose. And opioid overdose is a huge issue. We will, in subsequent conversations, talk about the difference between crack cocaine, what happened with that, and opioids, what's happening with that. I will say in Durham is the only county in North Carolina where there are more overdoses among the African American population than the white population. And so that's a little bit different than other counties. But I want you to look at that number, and I want you to think about how much money has been poured into this situation with opioids and opioid overdoses. And of course it's necessary, of course it's important, and of course we want that to continue. Point here being that during this time of COVID-19, people are stressed out, and those who will use, who have been using who may be in recovery will have a difficult time getting through this without self-medication. But I want you to look at this number. This number is from 2017, not 18, not 19, not 20. 33,072 acute alcohol intoxication emergency department visits in 2017. But we don't hear about that because alcohol is so ingrained in our society and so normalized. When you have a family reunion, where's the alcohol? You have a birthday party, where's the alcohol? When you're sitting at home at 6 o'clock in the evening, where's the alcohol? You know, and so the thing is that we have to be aware, and we need to, while we're putting on our face masks, while we're staying at home, while we're disinfecting, and while we're doing all of these other things, don't forget to look for signs of intoxication among those that we love, because we may not really ever realize that that's what's happening. Okay, so let's go a little bit deeper. Now, one of the things that on subsequent calls that we will talk about, we're going to talk about solutions. We're going to talk about what we can do as white people, as Black people, as people who are really gung-ho about getting things done, as people who are, you know, just a little bit more timid and not sure about how much they really want to be involved. If you are an advocate, if you care, then at this time in our lives, your voice, your action is welcomed. So when I first saw this image, I looked at it and I said, wow, this is how I feel. I feel like a person that has had a million cuts from trying to understand where and how I fit into this world that seems to be against me as a Black person. The hurt is tremendous. It's not something that can be described in one word or described in one situation, because it happens so often and all the time. So that's the first thing that I want people to understand. We can segment experiences individually and say, this happened to me, that happened to me. And for some people, that's the way it happens. You know, it's like, okay, I had this situation, and then they can get over it before the next situation arises. But for Black people, it is a constant situation, no matter how accepted it appears that you are, or acceptable as you appear to be. There is an underlying fragmenting of your emotions, microaggressions that are always cutting, and there's not a way to escape that. We can't escape being Black. Don't want to, but we can't escape being Black. And so when COVID-19, it was such a surprise to everybody. It seemed to be a surprise. Oh my goodness, COVID-19 is impacting the African-American community more than any other. Well, so what's new? What hasn't? What negative thing hasn't impacted the Black community more than other communities? You can't name one. So is it our fault or what? So this is the ideal picture that everybody would like to think exists. And the question is, Why don't they just ... Why don't they just go out and get a job? Why don't they just go out and get an education? Why do they have to be so angry? Why don't they just calm down? Why don't they just? And no matter how we present ourselves as being in line with society, the fact that we are Black and seen as Black is an issue. And that piece is going to take a lot more discussion that we will embark upon next Friday. But there's still more to come. So I've talked about adverse childhood experiences since 2014. And realizing that adverse childhood experiences are not the only thing that impacts or results in trauma. So African Americans experience trauma in many areas, like a million cuts. So household trauma, which is, the one that we mostly hear about, has to do what happens in a child's home before their 18th birthday. If they experience physical neglect, emotional neglect of family members incarcerated, if the parents are divorced, if there is sexual abuse or emotional abuse, if someone in the home uses drugs, if there's a parent that has a mental illness, then those kinds of things are household related. And so when we talk about this in terms of people who live a privileged life other than, and this is not at all minimizing those adverse childhood experiences, but just think, if I experience adverse childhood experiences, but I don't have other traumas, then that's one area that I have to deal with. But then there are environmental traumas, and that has to do with the built community or the environment where people live. Just like with alcohol outlets, more of them being in Black neighborhoods, minority neighborhoods. Data recently showed that tobacco shops, not vape shops necessarily, but tobacco shops where you can get loosies, that all of them are in Black communities in Durham. 100% of those stores are in Black communities. And again, it's the advertising, it's what you put out there all the time. Look at this, look at this, look at this. So the environmental traumas have to do with poverty, substandard wages, lack of jobs, historical trauma, meaning that someone who is Black has embedded in their DNA the trauma of slavery. There's the trauma of the Holocaust. There's the trauma of what happened to Native Americans for the Native American community. So we are talking about Black people today, but there are traumas that other folks have experienced. Substandard schools, structural racism. So is it the people, is it me as a Black person? Is it you who are on the phone? Is it you that because you're Black that this is an issue? No, it's the built environment. Somebody built that environment. So, can you put your phone on mute, please? I think it's William Moore. You need to put your phone on mute. It's the built environment that people live in.
Yeah.
You need to put your phone on mute, please. Thank you. That people live in that causes additional trauma. So when we think about Black people, we usually see them in their environmental trauma. and we look and we think, oh, look at them over there. Look how they're dressed. Look how they act. Look at. Why can't they just? Well, if we put all of the advantages that exist in an environment that is healthy, access to groceries, walking trails, safe neighborhoods to walk in, then we would have the same results as those people do. And so we have to separate the environment from how we perceive people to be. And then the third area of trauma has to do with natural disasters or situations like we are in right now with COVID-19. And so Black people are more impacted by those experiences. Princeville has not been rebuilt yet because of the flood that came along. And so we have to understand that people can't be like you because they don't have the advantages that you have. I'm not saying that you should be embarrassed or ashamed of your privilege, but I am saying that you should recognize that you are privileged. And how might you use your privilege in order to benefit someone else? So I just wanted to say a word about privilege. I had a situation where I went to a grocery store and I was treated terribly. Yes, in 2020, I was shocked. And so I posted something on Facebook about it, and a friend who is white inboxed me. And she said, Wanda, that's unacceptable. What do you want me to do? I was thinking, do? You really want to do something? And so she said, give me the name of the store. What time was it? What was what did the person look like that did that to you? Do you know that she went to the store? She talked to the manager. She wasn't happy with what the manager said. So she inboxed me again. Wanda, I'm not happy with what happened. I'm calling corporate. I'm emailing corporate. And she emailed corporate, copied me on the email, and got results. Now, she used her privilege in order to help me solve a problem that I could not solve on my own. Because many times when we as Black people try to advocate for ourselves, then it appears like we want to be a troublemaker. Okay, now I'm a very determined person. I will do what I need to do in order to get what I need done, but I'm not a troublemaker. I'm perceived as a troublemaker, but I'm not a troublemaker. I'm gonna get things done though. So we're gonna take a little break and I'm gonna open the line. Well, you can unmute your phone if there's something that you would like to say at this point before we go on.
Dr. Wanda, can you hear me?
Yes.
I just want to say I appreciate the information. It just helps keep us balanced. I think as African American, when you already kind of grew up with all that stuff, it's just in you. But
Yeah.
we need to, balance. So I appreciate the effort and helping to keep us informed. Appreciate that a lot.
Thank you. I appreciate your saying that. Okay, we're going to go a little deeper. Are you ready to go a little deeper? All right, here we go. Okay. So I won't say recently, but not so long ago, the American Association of Pediatrics determined that racism is a public health issue. Why did they say it's a public health issue? Well, from some of the information that Earl gave, we can see that it's an issue. But the data showed that children that were subject to discriminatory language, were called the N-word, microaggressions, where, it's almost like you wonder, well, why don't you like me? That those things really impacted a child's health, not only a child's health, but adults. When adults are faced with racism and microaggressions are the underhanded, sly way that people treat you when you know that they don't want to serve you, they don't want to, do things for you, all of that, but that impacts the lungs, the heart, and all of those things can lead to the chronic diseases that we talked about earlier. So we have to learn how to bolster ourselves, get healthy, so we're not going to be the statistic. And make sure your phones are muted, please. So this is extremely impactful. So then I had them build me a cage, and I really like it. Now I'm safe from cats, and no one can sneak up and hurt me. I think it's Rev. If you could turn your, if you would mute your phone. Okay, let me see if I, thank you. So here we have systems that have been built that we find ourselves in, but now you can't fly because you're in a cage. And so the impression that's given is that we're supposed to look like her, that we're supposed to be happy in the cage, that we're supposed to be happy, just, pleasant, everything is lovely, lovely, when we know that it's not. We know that things are different when we approach any system, the school system, police system, criminal justice, the hospital system. Do you know that there's so many Black people who have gone to the ED to get treatment for COVID-19 who were sent home because their symptoms were not, such that they, you just go home, you'll be okay. Now, let me stop here for a second because COVID-19 is deadly. We know that we can't go into the hospital with a loved one. And so I did an interview with a doctor, and she said that if you have a loved one that's going to the ED because they have symptoms, then make sure that they have a fully charged cell phone, that it remains on, so that you can talk to them and hear everything that the doctor is saying. So it doesn't have to be kind of an underhanded thing. You can say, I have my loved one on the phone. I may not remember everything that you say to me. Can you please repeat that? It is so important because once they go in, sad as it is, they may never come out and you will never know what happened. So our daughter was really, really, really sick. She's strong and brave like her mom and dad. So she was really sick, and she took her phone with her, and she went, and everything that the doctor said to her, I heard. And then but they told her to go home. During the next week, she went back again because her symptoms got worse. Same thing. I'm on the phone. We have to do that because we want to trust that medical professionals will treat us the same way that they treat everyone else. Sad to say, when we walk in, they see color first. And I'm not saying that they deny treatment. Oh, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that if you need a test, you may not get a test when someone else does. So you need to have someone who will advocate for you. That is lesson number 52. That is so very important. So no, it doesn't feel good to be in a cage. And this actually has to do with Maya Angelou's Why the Caged Bird Sings. Not because there's so much joy and happiness, but what else are we supposed to do? You know, so we sing in the midst of our tears. We sing in the middle of the million cuts. We sing when we know that we are not treated respectfully. But this is a time when we should come together and advocate for ourselves and not be in silos, but advocate for each other, care about each other, join together so that we can live and prosper. So this is the way that we're going to look at this in subsequent conversations. As I said, we'll meet again. These are just going to be an hour long, so, or maybe a little less sometimes, but we need to get through this. So racism, as much as we don't want to believe it. I mean, you know it happens, but it's almost like, are you kidding me? So systematic racism refers to, and it can happen in all those areas: housing, criminal justice, public health, education, banking. Okay, so in education, we can see that with the number of Black children that are suspended every year. You can look at any school system, there are more Black children that are being suspended than others. And I mean by lots. Banking, in the COVID-19 incentives that were sent out for small businesses and others to, you know, get that stimulus money, a lot of Black people were left out of it. Some of it was because they didn't have relationships with larger banks. So that's a step we can take, right? Or we can advocate for. In education and suspensions, we can talk about, okay, you know, why are you suspending Johnny and no, why are you suspending, okay, Johnny, and not suspending Jake? So, and then housing, loans at higher interest rates, criminal justice, well, we know about that. And public health, everything that has to do with health and access to health is discriminatory towards Black people. So systemic racism refers to ongoing racial inequalities that are embedded in society. That's systemic. It means it just goes through all of the systems. Institutional racism has to do with policies and practices within organizations and institutions. I was so happy a few months ago before COVID-19 when Duke Medical Center decided that all of their first-year residents were going to come to Wanda Boone so that I would be able to talk to them about how to relate to the community and about these kinds of issues. And so that is a policy that's being embedded at Duke so that that institutional racism, ultimately the hope is that it will go away. Interpersonal racism is bigotry and biases shown between individuals through word and action. And so that can be, you know, I mean, people who clutch their purses or, you know, and walk across the street when you come along and it's like, me? Or who literally just call you out of your name. And then internalized racism is race-based beliefs and feelings within individuals, internalized within individuals. And so we are going to deconstruct all of these things and find ways where we can take action and find some solutions for ourselves. Okay. All right. So sad. Now, of course, this is George Floyd. We understand, do we? We don't. The fact that racism exists to the point of Black people dying has culminated in the myriad and number of Black people, not even, I mean, these are the ones we know about, but the wounds have been opened and we have been laid bare. I probably stopped crying consistently for the first time today. It seems like this situation has opened the floodgates, not only for me, but for so many people. And it's like every injustice, everything that ever happened, everybody that died, all of a sudden, it just opened up everything and opened up the floodgates. And then I realized that not only, and I don't mean only, is greater than he that is in me than he that's in the world. Yes, I know that, but the world hurts. And justice really is a part of what the Word of God tells us to be involved in. So we need to think about that as well. And so what do? We look for, anticipate, and work towards justice so that these situations won't be so normal. I mean, it was almost supposed to be like, okay, just get over it. Why don't you just get over the fact that I can't even bring myself to say what happened to him? You know, I'm not going to do that. But how can that be seen as something that's normal? The young lady who called the police on the Black gentleman in the park, she got her dog taken away from her because she was like, you know, holding the dog by the collar, and the dog was, you know, and I'm thinking, okay, you can see that there's something wrong about how this dog was treated, but a human being. So there's been a slow and steady devaluing of Black lives for 400 years. And we as Black people have to learn how to advocate, vote, become involved so that we can be a part of the solution for ourselves and not be so angry and worry about who's getting ahead. That's got to stop. So we pour into ourselves. It's something we work so hard and we have to do 200% in order to be seen as average. So we work so hard that we have to learn how to take care of ourselves. But in taking care of ourselves, as Earl said in the beginning, then we will become healthier. And we won't have, you know, this situation when another disease comes along that takes our lives because we have looked out for ourselves and our health first. So Earl, do you want to say something about these?
Certainly. So until next time, folks, here are some things we need to do. We need to practice self-care, take care of ourselves, and that's physically as well as emotionally. We need to provide space to feel safe. Now, personally, I call that at home. Unfortunately, I'm a homebody and becoming more of one. We have to maintain our routines so that the isolation that lots of folks are feeling now, the just being out of sorts that a lot of people are feeling, maintaining a routine will help us to avoid some of that. For those of you who are closed-mouthed, and those of you who know me know I'm not a very talkative person, but we have to learn to verbalize our feelings and not keep things bottled up. That doesn't mean we have to yak, but we can share our feelings with others, and that is a relief in itself. And then you have to calm your body and mind, because things affect us and they affect us negatively. Stress, we know, is a killer, and stress has negative effects on our bodies and our minds. So whatever you can do to calm yourself and get some normalcy, then you need to do it. Be it something athletic, something artistic, whatever it is, a hobby, whatever, going for a walk, whatever it is. And then we must maintain sleep hygiene. Some of you may have the little Fitbit things where you check your sleep habits every night. Maintain your sleeping routine. You're going to bed and you're waking up. So it is imperative in these very difficult times, and I'm not underplaying or downplaying the situation at all, but it is imperative that we take good care of ourselves so that we are not overly negatively affected by disruption in our way of life and in our routines. So keep that in mind until we come together again. And not just in mind, but put some action to that as well.